Hey there, thanks for downloading the Garden Fork Radio Podcast. I appreciate you taking a minute to check us out. If this is your first time here, Garden Fork is what I call eclectic DIY. It is cooking, gardening, home repair, chainsaws, beekeeping, little car repair, basically kind of weekend DIY stuff that you and I both do. I also have a YouTube channel where I post videos weekly on there as well. And Garden Fork Radio is kind of a place for me to expand on that and to talk to interesting people and regular guests. Today we have my friend Will. He is active on the Garden Fork Radio Facebook group. He has a YouTube channel called The Weekend Homestead, and he's also a part-time pyrotechnician. And I thought that was kind of interesting. If we could learn about what that's all like in case you're interested, or if you're just driving in your car and listening to Garden Fork. So here we go with Will. All right. Hey, Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone, Will and I have actually been, we both have YouTube channels and we've been talking on Skype every once in a while. And I have to apologize to you, Will, because I just assumed you'd been on the show before and then I realized you haven't. So...
Yeah, I've been around for, part of the group and listening to the podcast and really enjoying the videos. It's been great for a long time, just kind of getting involved with the channel overall.
So you have a house, you live in the Minnesota Twin Cities area, and then you have a little place in the country in Wisconsin somewhere. Is that right?
Yeah, so we live, just in the city, have regular jobs, and then kind of on the weekends, instead of going to, like people go to a beach house or go to a cabin on a lake or something like that, we go, to an off-grid property and, kind of live the, I don't want to say the farming lifestyle, but the outdoor lifestyle on the weekends. And it's been a nice, change. It's a good yin to the yang of living in the city versus, living in the country. So you get a kind of a taste of both.
Because when I grew up in Wisconsin outside of Milwaukee, and on the weekends, my friends would go what everyone called up north. Oh, we're going up north. And they'd go to like Rhinelander and stuff. So northern Wisconsin, in other words. So
Sure.
it was very much a thing. So when you said, oh, I'm from Minnesota, and I go to my little cabin, I knew exactly where you were going with that. So
Yeah, we're up in the Hayward area, which is kind of the vacation trap of Wisconsin. You have the Wisconsin Dells as one area, and then Hayward's kind of the other one. And the town is 2,000 people during the week and 10,000 people on the weekend. It's kind of the way it is.
that sounds like the Hamptons on Long Island. So
Probably not as expensive.
Right. Yeah, Alec Baldwin isn't your neighbor,
Larry the Cable Guy does have a place up there, but other than that, that's the only celebrity that I know of.
There's a couple celebrities near us with our little house, but our town I really love because it's very low key. So that's
Very nice.
my favorite part about it. So when we've been talking for a while and you happen to mention, oh, by the way, I'm a pyrotechnician. So I was very curious if you could share with everyone how you came about doing that and what that job is.
Sure. Well, everybody knows fireworks because the 4th of July and, everybody goes to some municipality or a park or a lake or something like that, and they watch fireworks over the weekend or on that specific time. And, I got involved with it by responding to a Craigslist ad of all things. I was looking for some stuff online and just happened to run into it. I've actually been into fireworks since I was a kid. My family shot fireworks in the backyard. Being in Wisconsin, you do that kind of thing often throughout the summer. And when we moved to Minnesota, it wasn't as popular. And then I kind of was doing some searching for something and happened to stumble upon it. And somebody said, hey, would you like to go try this one time? So I showed up, and you do a lot of grunt work. I'll tell you, it's a lot of, hot days outside in the sun, moving heavy equipment around and things like that. But then you get the 10 minutes of glory when the sun goes down and all the shells and all the stuff goes up in the air and the magic happens. So, it was fun. I started out, doing really simple municipality shows, and then slowly kind of worked my way up through different licenses and different ranks and things like that to now shooting professionally, both for, major sporting events and, outdoor pieces, big 4th of July celebrations, those types of things, plus concerts and different shows. So I kind of work for an agency that, basically lines up different events that we sign up for. You show up with a crew and do your thing.
So did you have to go through, is it like federal or state licensing, or is it within the industry, or?
Sure. Actually, the fireworks industry, the safety and licensing are probably the two biggest things out there. When I started out, it was you worked as I think it's called a journeyman or someone, below someone who has a license. And during that time you study and you have to take a couple different tests. In the state of Minnesota, you have to take two different tests, one for indoor fireworks and one for outdoor fireworks. And then once you pass those tests, you have to work for somebody for a certain number of shows as kind of their assistant. And then eventually you get to the point where they give you your license. And then that allows you to get involved with some of the really big productions and, the different types of equipment and different types of events. And then eventually that kind of leads to getting sign off on different facilities and things like that as time goes along.
So I have a very basic understanding of doing a fireworks show, but it seems to be these large, I think are steel pipes that these different created fireworks, which are usually like in a ball shape, are dropped into. There's some sort of a detonator wire, and that's run to, at this point, I think a computer that can be timed to music and stuff. And is that how it works? Is that?
Well, yeah, actually, it's really very simple. There's a lot of different materials, but essentially there's a tube that's on the ground and they're all different sizes. They go from 3 inches all the way up to 16 inches in size and diameter.
Oh, wow.
And then the shell corresponds to it. So, a 4-inch shell, the tube is 4 inches and actually the shell is, 3.5 because it needs to be able to fit inside the tube fairly tightly. So you set up a number of these tubes and then you lower the shell in and the fuse comes out the top. And in the olden days, they would actually light these by hand with a road flare. You'd stand next to the tube and light it. Unfortunately, it was found to be, very dangerous, and there's a lot of accidents in the business. Nowadays, you're right. It's a little electric match that gets plugged in. Basically, it looks like a match head, but then there's a little wire that comes off of it that you plug into a panel, and then that panel runs into a junction box, which runs back to a control. And that control can be something as simple as a switch that's on a board that you flip, and every time you flip a switch, that match fires, which lights the fuse, which puts the shell into the air.
Yep.
Or it could be computerized all the way up to computerizing and matching it to music or an event or a concert where when you push the button, it does something electronically that would put all the shells into the air.
Because I worked on a couple of TV productions where we had to time camera movements to a soundtrack. And I'm in the gearhead in me is thinking it's probably a very similar controller where you've got a computer with maybe an analog to digital converter on it going out to different triggers. We would trigger to cameras rather than shells going off, but kind of a similar thing. I'm thinking, I don't know if
Actually, that's exactly what it is. When a sporting team takes the field and you see the guys running through, the fireballs going up in the air, or when they do the Star Spangled Banner, the national anthem, and the shells go off of the roof of the building and everything like that, that's all timed by an individual. A gentleman like me is standing behind a switchboard, and we have a headset on, and we're listening either for our cues or we know when our cues are. And when it says rockets, red glare, you press the button and boom, off go the shells that match to that, and bombs in the air, and so on, and you time it to the production. Now, not all shows are, that highly produced. I mean, example, 4th of July show, the guy says, hey, at 10 o'clock, start doing your thing, and when you're done, you're done, versus, the NFL or something like that, where they say, okay, at this time, we need this to happen, and then we're going to have the TV camera move here, and then you need to do this. So it's very choreographed. So you have different levels of skill and different levels of coordination to go into those things, but it all really is basically the same thing.
So the actual creation of they're called mortars is a different world, yes?
Yeah. There's so you have the tube themselves that the shells are fired out of. So you have the mortar, which is the tube, and then the shell goes inside of it. The shells are, most of them are produced in China. They come over here in a container ship. And when the show organizer kind of looks at it and goes, okay, I want to do a show that's going to last 10 minutes, they calculate out, okay, when I press the button, it takes 4 seconds for the shell to get to the right height, and then it goes boom. So if I want to do that many of them in this many minutes and I want them to go off at this time, I'm going to need 300 shells, let's say. And then they just put together a little script. And when you show up on shoot site, in the morning, you look at the book and go, okay, our show is 10 minutes and there's 300 effects. You wire in the things according to the numbers and the codes is where they need to go. And then when it comes to showtime, you just follow the recipe basically. And in the end result is you get a great show.
Neat. If somebody was interested in learning more about this, maybe as a career, what would you suggest for them?
Usually the easiest way to get involved with the fireworks industry is to contact the companies that are actually shooting the shows. If you do a Google search for your area, there's, different shows and companies, and usually the smaller ones are easy to get into, and they're always looking for help. If you Googled you got to do a little bit of foresight into this. So back in April, you'd look it up and go, hey, I want to get into this. Then they do their training between April and May at the little company. And then, you'd be ready for the 4th of July. But, companies are always adding new people because there's more and more shows. As fireworks becomes more popular, there's more and more people needed for a show. Like my show that I'll be doing on the 4th of July, I'll have 5 people helping me get everything set up. We start at 8 in the morning. So there's a lot of different levels to the cruise. Contact a company, send them an email and say, hey, I'm interested in this. And then they'll put you through the process to do it. You can't just show up and do it. There's training. There's a lot of safety because inherently this is dangerous. But it's a lot of fun. And, I've enjoyed it for the last 5 years. It's been a great side project.
So when you go to family picnics, do people expect you to shoot off fireworks?
Actually, it's we actually end up talking about it more than actually doing it. Like, hey, I saw this that you did, or I saw you're at this event, or did you do this? Or like when something happens, like a couple of years ago, somebody in San Diego, pressed the button and all the fireworks went off in like a minute instead of over 15 minutes. Like they all went off instantly. I'll get that email to me about 80 times, as we come closer to the 4th of July going, hey, did you see this? Yes, I've seen it,
Oh, that's like with me with the beehive collapse videos that people keep emailing me.
Yeah, I think I've sent you the flow hive thing a couple times too. I'm guessing you get that every once in a while.
Yes, thank you, Will. Well, cool. I was just curious about that, and I think people listening they're in their car right now thinking about a career change. Pyrotechnics is the future.
Well, actually, it's a nice hobby to have on the side too. You can do your regular job because most people don't fire off fireworks at 3:00 on a Wednesday afternoon. Instead, they shoot the shows on Saturdays and Sundays. So if you wanted to do it as even a hobby, it's really easy to get into. Just have to contact a company, send a nice email with a little bit about yourself, and most companies will listen to you and give you a shot.
Cool. So on our Garden Fork Facebook group page, you thankfully been very active, and a number of people have asked about tractors, about kind of this bridge between your lawn tractor and not a full-size tractor, but maybe like an in-between tractor. And I've always just kind of poked you and said, okay, here you go. So to save some time for you don't have to write it again, is when people are thinking about upgrading to something that maybe has a plow or a little backhoe or something, what are your thoughts?
Tractors it's really interesting. The dynamic of, the big farm tractors that you see out in the field are really doing the exact same thing that the smaller and the mid-sized tractors are doing. It's just on a smaller scale. It's bigger tires, bigger engine, bigger scoops. The entry level little excavator, let's say, would take a 12-inch, dig every time it digs into the earth versus, the commercial ones where they take 36. The principles, the way it does it, everything are all the same between them. It's just bigger, larger, faster, stronger. I think when a person's looking at, that type of product or those, pieces of the market, understand what you want to do. And then I always tell people, ask yourself, is this something I'm going to do very often, or is this something I'm going to do once? Because it might be better to rent it than to buy it, because an investment in a tractor, could be fairly costly. So sometimes, there's a rental place near our place, and, I can rent a piece of equipment for $300 for the weekend versus, buying the same one for $20,000. So it's kind of like, how do you, justify how many times you're going to use it? I would say the first thing you do when you're looking at a tractor is figure out specifically what you want to do and how often you want to do it. And then if the often comes up many, many times, then consider, buying a piece of equipment. The second thing I tell everybody is buy the right piece of equipment to do your job, in the sense of, a lot of people will be like, well, if I got the smaller one, I could probably make it work. Unfortunately, it's a lot harder on the equipment, and most likely it'll be more broken down than anything else. If you need a tractor that pulls a 6-foot plow, don't buy the smallest, lawn tractor out there, then put that thing on there and hope that it's going to perform and do what you want, because you'll end up wearing out your equipment or damaging it quicker than anything else.
Interesting. Yeah, I've always wanted a mini excavator, but I just have no reason to have one,
Yeah. You could dig up your raised beds really quickly, but, how often are you going to do that?
I actually have to trench a trench between my house and my garage for, we're going to upgrade the electric in the garage. And I really wanted to do it myself. And then I realized, my neighbor has an excavator. I'll just hire him.
Yeah, no, you know what? That's actually a really good way to do it is if you're in the market to get a tractor or an excavator or any piece of equipment like that. I've actually put an ad on Craigslist or found in the services part of Craigslist where you punch in a name and say, hey, I'm looking to do this. And all of a sudden you find a guy who's like, hey, I do that for a living at my landscaping company. How about I come over on Saturday for $150 and I'll do it for you? The machine's not getting used on the weekend, so he uses it for that kind of stuff and make a little extra cash. Sometimes that's way easier. So
there's a guy in our town that's like basically man with Bobcat. And Bobcat is basically like a treaded bulldozer tractor, and it has a backhoe and a scoop on it, and he shows up and boom, it's done. So I love the idea of having another piece of equipment, but I also realize that that's quite an overhead if you have to carry a car, a payment on that, or you have to maintain it all the time.
Well, one thing you can do too is, and I think I recently typed this up on the Garden Fork page, is I talked about buying a used piece of equipment. You don't always have to buy a new one.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, like I was talking to one person, I said, I think I typed in Troy Built or Craftsman on Craigslist, and it came up with 2,000 results. So, I mean, there's plenty of used tractors out there, just sorting out the one that you actually need, what you're going to use it for, and, do a little bit of research on, what do the belts look like? What do the tires look like? When you go look at it to decide if the person's actually maintained it. And if they had, then it might be a good purchase.
Yeah, the maintenance thing is key. There's some beat up stuff out there.
Yeah. I always use the phrase, if you take care of your equipment, it'll take care of you. So that's my mantra usually when I talk to people about tractors is if you buy it, you have to maintain it. Otherwise it'll be broken down and you won't be able to rely on it.
What kind of tractor are you using out on the property?
We have a Kubota tractor. It's called a BX25. So Kubota has kind of an entry-level model where they're lawnmowers and things like that. And then they move up to what's called a subcompact tractor, which is essentially the same thing as their big tractors, but just smaller. You can still run, the bucket on the front, and it has an excavator on the back. And we use it for tons of different projects. The nice thing I like about it is it has a generic hitch on the back called a 3-point hitch, which then I can go rent a piece of equipment. Like we needed a post hole digger to plant a bunch of trees and do a bunch of work. And, we just got the post hole digger, hooked it up, and boom, we were, planting trees. And when I was done, I just returned it to the rental place, and, we were in good shape. And so making sure your tractor has the ability to have, different components hooked up to it universally is key, because then you can always rent those pieces and use them on the weekend. And that saves you money too. So
it has a 3-point and a PTO coming off the back?
Yep. The PTO is the power takeoff, and basically what it does is it rotates and allows you to use any tool that rotates, so a brush cutter, a post hole digger, even a tiller or something like that. And you have to decide which devices. Like we have a lot of trails, so we have a brush hog that we use all the time to kind of do the heavy mowing through the brush. So we bought one of those. But like the post hole digger, I don't see myself digging holes all the time, so we went the route of, instead of buying one, we just rented it and used it for the day, hooked it up, and it was all universal. That's the nice thing about tractors these days is all the tractors are universal in how the PTO works, how the 3-point, which is the way the device attaches to the back of the tractor, works in the hydraulics. So, I mean, they all work together and they're all universal, which is really nice.
In our area, upstate, we've learned through word of mouth there's more than one rental place, and we've learned which one has the better equipment.
That is key. That's always knowing where you can get your equipment from and what they have available is definitely a key part of it.
I had to do some cast iron pipe plumbing work down here in the city on a job I was on, and it's called a pipe cracker. It's this it looks like a chain it looks like this medieval torture device, but it's a chain with little wheel cutters on it, and you wrap it around a cast iron pipe, and you crank it down, and you bring it back and forth, and it scores the pipe slowly. And I didn't want to buy one, so I rented one from the nearby rental place, and I couldn't get it to work. And so I had to go back to that shop, and I go, I can't get this to work. Oh yeah, that one's broke. Here, try this one. And I'm like, no thanks. And I went around the corner to a different rental place, and I'm like, I need the best pipe cracker you have. And they gave me an almost new one, and I was done in 10 minutes, but I wasted half the day trying to find the tool. So
definitely.
It doesn't hurt to go to the hardware store and ask, hey, who rents the good tools, or your neighbors or something,
And like for us, because we drive to a remote location to do all of this stuff, one of the benefits that we have is living in the cities. There's dozens of places you can rent from. So what we ended up doing is getting a little 4x8 trailer, really simple. And when we need to get an implement or a tool or whatever, we show up to the rental place and say, yeah, we need the tiller because we're going to plant a bunch of stuff. The guy, sets it on there with a forklift. We tie it down to the trailer, drive up to, go work for the weekend. We do whatever we need to, and then, bring it back home and return it to the place. And, sometimes when you go to the rural locations, they don't have the tools that you need, but you could always pick it up in a bigger area. So having a little utility trailer that you can pull behind the car that you can pick this kind of stuff up with is a nice thing to have.
And I don't know about over there, but around here, a lot of guys, they'll give you a week rate. It's usually 3 days equals a week.
Yep.
So if you're going to take a long weekend, and sometimes they won't even charge you for Sunday because they're closed on Sunday, just stuff like that. You can always ask, and I think the nicer you are, the nicer they'll be back. So.
Oh, definitely. And it, ask them questions. That's the other thing too, is these guys like, hey, this is what I want to do. And he's like, if you're going to do this, you don't want the 9-inch version of this. You want the 14-inch version or whatever, and they'll help you. You tell them what kind of equipment you have, and they'll match the attachments up to it. That's another important thing is you don't want to have a tractor that's, let's say 23 horsepower and you put a tiller on the back that requires a 40 horse because you're just going to burn out your tractor in the process and you don't want to damage your stuff. So you tell the guy, hey, I have this tractor. And he goes, oh, well, perfect. We'll get you this tiller that'll match up almost perfectly to it.
Sweet. So with those post holes, you were planting trees, right?
Yeah, we did 2 big projects up on our property over Memorial Weekend, which was planting some apple trees and kind of planting an orchard. And then we also put in a fence around the outside of it because we're not there to watch it constantly. And if you plant trees, it's just, a flag for deer to come and, eat and everything you have and destroy all your work.
What I thought was brilliant about that, it's kind of a great example of paying the money to rent a tool and your actual time. You saved a ton of time planting. I think each tree took 11 minutes or something, you said?
Yeah, we got it down to about 11 minutes. The first one took 30 minutes once we figured out, how to do it and everything. But then once we got to the end, we had kind of a system where I would drill the hole. My wife would, dig out the space. My dad would get in and do his part, and everybody kind of did it. We made it like an assembly line, and we were able to plant 30 trees over 2-day period, plus have time to kind of do all the other maintenance stuff that we wanted to do. And when you have a piece of equipment up there like that, you find all the reasons to use it. Oh, hey, let's put in a little split rail fence here. Or let's put this in. So you drill all the holes ahead of time so you can come back the next weekend or down the road and finish everything up.
There's a kind of composting called post-hole composting, and you can have your little analog manual post-hole digger, but you could dig a bunch of post holes right next to each other, and you just fill them up. And once it's filled, you just throw dirt on the top, and you're done. And it can compost your lawn or your whatever you're planting it near. I thought it was kind of interesting.
Then do you dig it up to get the compost out of there, or do you just plant right into it?
You just plant right into it. I mean, you plant into it the next year.
Sure.
Or with that lasagna gardening method, I guess you could do a little faster. But I thought it was an interesting way to, if you have an excess of material, or you're wanting to have like a permanent garden, you could post-hole compost within the garden. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is actually. We should have talked before I used it. I could have gave that a try for some of the plantings we did.
Now you have to go rent that hole digger again.
Exactly. Well, it's kind of fun to play with the tools too. Everybody talks about all the work that has to do with it, but I'll tell you, there was something enjoyable about, going out and, using the equipment. And, it's kind of everybody growing up looked at the construction equipment going, gosh, I wish I could drive that bulldozer or that excavator or whatever it is. And so we get to play with that on the weekends, and it's kind of fun. It was definitely a good investment for us, especially with all the projects we had to do. If we had to rent it, it'd just take a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, my neighbor with the excavator will not let me touch the excavator.
That is no fun.
I've asked.
Did you know that there's actually places now out there? I think there's one in Las Vegas and a couple of the big cities where they call it the big boy sandbox. And literally it's like a 40-acre thing that has full-size excavators and bulldozers and trucks, and then you just rent it like as a bachelor party. They go and teach you how to use it, and then you run the machine for half an hour or something like that, and it's like a gigantic sandbox, but the sandbox is full of real-size bulldozers and excavators and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So if you want to get your excavator fixed, that might be a way to do it. I don't know of any on the East Coast, but I knew there was one out on the West Coast somewhere that we saw an advertisement for.
That's funny. I never thought that could be a little experiential thing.
Sure.
You're listening to Garden Fork Radio, the audio companion to our gardenfork.tv video show about DIY, cooking, gardening, other fun stuff. You can find us on Facebook. It's gardenfork.com/Facebook. We are on Google Plus as well. We are on Twitter as Garden Fork TV, and we are on Pinterest as Garden Fork TV as well. And you can always get our email newsletter. That's the best way to get a hold of us. Send an email to news@gardenfork.tv. You'll get an auto-response with a link, or go to our site, gardenfork.tv, and there's a sign-up right there. It's free to subscribe to our email newsletter. No charge. You just have to read my writings, and we usually include a picture of the Labradors. All right? So tell me about the trees that you planted there.
So the one thing that we learned, I didn't know much about apple trees in the beginning of this. Actually, I got introduced by watching some YouTube videos about a year ago. And, we had thought about, I don't know if you've ever been to Wisconsin recently, but there's a lot of these little, farms around that have, they call them like tourist trap farms, where it's an apple orchard and a pumpkin patch, and everybody gets dressed up in their flannel in the fall and, drinks pumpkin spice stuff and picks apples. Well, we thought, why don't we have that same experience at home? So we started looking at apple trees and looked online, and I learned so much about just the ability to plant apple trees anywhere, because really the bottom 6 inches of the tree is one type of tree, and then they graft on the actual variety of apple that you want. So if you want a Honeycrisp, let's say, the tree itself may be a Honeycrisp tree, but the bottom of the tree might be a different rootstock, would be the, something to your climate. So like we can't normally have peach trees in Wisconsin, but I was able to purchase some peach trees that were good for zone 4 because the rootstock was good for zone 4. And then the top of the tree was just a regular peach tree, which was fascinating that I didn't even understand the science even existed for this. And I guess it's been going on for ages, and that's how they make trees work in different climates.
So were you able to find that locally, or did you have to order them, or?
Some of the stuff what I did was I did a lot of reading online to understand what trees and what rootstock would work. And then I went to our local nursery and I said, hey, we're in zone 4 and I would really like a Honeycrisp tree, or I'd really like a Harrelson, or, a Macintosh, something along those lines. And then they were able to match up and go, oh, okay, you live here. So instead of getting this version of the Macintosh, which is good for zone 5, we're going to get you the Macintosh that's good for zone 4. And then they ordered them for us, and we showed up one day, picked them up, and we were good to go. The trick on ordering fruit trees is there's a finite number of them available every year. So you have to get to your nursery early. So we started talking to them in February for something we were picking up in May.
Yeah, plan ahead. What's that like?
Well, when you live in 2 different places, you kind of have to plan all the time, because if you forget your wrench at home and you're 2 hours away, you'll have to wait till next weekend to do whatever you needed to do.
Yeah, I've been there. So you have been asking me about beekeeping questions, and this year you started out with the mason bees, and I was curious to hear your experiences with that.
Yeah, the mason bees have been an interesting one. I've always been nervous about having a hive because, we're 2 or 3 hours away from where we'd have them, and it doesn't really work in the place where we are in the city to have them. And you and I had some conversations, and I've listened to some of the podcasts where you talk about that. And then you had brought up mason bees, so I did a little bit of reading and kind of learned a little bit about them, that it's actually something that's fairly easy that anybody could do if you wanted to have pollinators around. You just basically set up the little house or the tubes or whatever, and you get a little box of them in April, set them out there, and they start doing their thing, and they do it for 8 weeks, and then you're good to go. And there's no real upkeep. Now, granted, you don't get honey, but you get the benefit of what the bees do. And then at the end of the season, they lay larvae in these cocoons that then you clean out in the fall, store in your refrigerator, and then in the springtime, start the whole process all over again. So it's a good way to get into beekeeping without having to buy, all the covers and all the hoods and equipment and things like that. I mean, I think I was into it for, $40 or $50, and, we now have bees. So it was kind of a nice thing to start as a kind of the training wheels version of, beekeeping.
So you bought some of the mason bee houses, which looked like bamboo tubes or something. What's that all about?
Yeah, so a mason bee is a cavity bee. They're they're solo bees. They don't work as a group. Like the female does basically all the work and the male just hangs around and eats and does the reproduction part of it. And basically what the female does is they find cavities to lay their eggs in. So what'll happen is it'll fly out and it'll pick up some mud and go and make a little plug, and then it'll lay its eggs inside of there. And then what the female mason bee does is it makes basically kind of a lunch for the little egg. It goes out and it picks up some nectar and some pollen and flies in and makes like, food for that. And then they pack in a little bit more mud and it makes like a little capsule inside of that tube. And they just keep doing that same process over and over and over again and fill up the tube. And then when it's full, they move to the next one. Well, during the summer, then once the mason bees kind of die off, which is happening right now, later in the summer, that those eggs hatch and they become a little larva, which eventually becomes a bee. The bee eats the food that's inside the tube to stay alive, and then it wraps a cocoon around itself, and it finishes turning into a bee from that process. So it goes from the egg to the larva. The larva eats, makes the cocoon, and then while it's in the cocoon over the winter, it actually turns into the bee. In the springtime, it chews its way out and start the process all over again.
So there's once a year hatching then?
Right. Yep. It happens usually between April and May. It's all temperature specific. So basically when the temperature hits about 50 degrees, the cocoon starts to wake up, and over the couple weeks of 50 degrees, the bees let themselves out and they do their thing.
Wow, because honeybees are reproducing constantly, except in the middle of winter.
Right. The beauty, though, is mason bees, you don't have to worry about them over the winter because you collect, at around February or so before the first frost, you collect all the tubes and you clean them out basically, and you get a pile of these little cocoons. You put them in a paper bag inside of your refrigerator, and that's all the maintenance you have to do for the winter. There's no worrying about wrapping the hive or do they have enough food to make it through the winter or anything like that. They're already there. They're in hibernation mode. And then in the springtime, when you put them out, that's what makes them so easy to kind of own and manage is you don't have all the, do they have enough food to make it through winter, or is frost going to kill them or any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Or are they going to swarm?
Yeah.
Like mine did.
Yeah. The biggest problem you have with mason bees is make sure you mark the bag correctly so nobody thinks it's a snack in your refrigerator.
Do not touch.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, cool. Well, we've been talking about being on the show, and I appreciate you taking the time here. I know it's the middle of the week here. If people want to find out more about you, Will, where can they go?
We have a YouTube channel, The Weekend Homestead. So if you just go to search for The Weekend Homestead, we have some videos up there. And then we have an Instagram account that we started that the videos, we try to come out once a week with them. And then periodically we'll do photos on different projects and things like that. Those are probably the two easiest ways to find me.
What do you got going on now? What's coming up this next weekend or two?
Actually, we're doing a very big project. So one of the questions I get asked a lot is, are you going to have animals? Are you going to have chickens? Are you going to have cows? Are you going to have any of that stuff? And unfortunately, since we're not there all the time, it's really hard to do that. But One of the ways we figured out around that is I've been working on what's called food plots or wildlife plantations, which is basically you take a section of your woods and plant a crop there, but that crop isn't to be harvested. It's for the animals. So, example, we didn't really have wild turkeys on the property a couple years ago when we bought it, and we've been doing this. And now, this last season, we had 25 of them on our trail cameras kind of cruising around the property. So this weekend, we're going to finish clearing out some areas where we had a bunch of down trees and kind of scrub brush that was just invasive plants growing. So we thought, well, let's clear that stuff out of there and plant in something that's helpful for the ecosystem in the area that we are. So that's what we're working on right now.
Turkeys love acorns.
Yeah, that and we actually found a really cheap seed at the farm store to buy clover, and we've been planting that. And man, we've seen the wildlife come into that stuff like you wouldn't believe. And it's easy to take care of. That's the best part about it. And it comes up every year.
And it puts nitrogen back in your soil.
Most definitely.
There you go. Well, cool. Thanks for taking the time, sir.
No problem. Well, thank you for having me.
Wow. How cool was that? All about how to be a pyrotechnician, learned about tractors, planting trees, mason bees. Not bad for one car ride, right? So I imagine you are at your destination. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, the email address is radio@gardenfork.tv. Also, a big shout out to all our supporters on Patreon. If you're interested in helping Garden Fork make more Garden Fork, you can go to patreon.com/gardenfork. There's a link in the show notes here for that. That helps us concentrate on making more of this and less on all the other stuff that we have to do. I always appreciate that. All right, so make it a great day. I'll see y'all later. Garden Fork's theme music is used under license from uniquetracks.com.